Hi, I'm Elaine Brewster. Welcome to Aspects of Energy, a forum where we talk about ways to raise your energy. And pretty much everything we talk about has some kind of basis in the book that I wrote about my husband's cancer journey, Scott's Choice. And one of the things I mentioned in there, that it was really, really wonderful to know that Elizabeth Smart, who had been kidnapped, was found. And there was a newspaper article. It turns out that just last Sunday marked 20 years since she was kidnapped. And it's pretty remarkable. She was gone for 9 months. And when she came back, her mom made a really important statement to her. Elizabeth, he's taken 9 months of your life. Don't let him take any more. In other words, you go on and be your own self. And so in this article, Elizabeth mentions how one person can make a difference. She said, but in my mind, that person was never me. It was always someone else. We don't think of her, but she said she's really pretty soft-spoken and introverted. But she has become, what do you call it? Forefront for sexual abuse, and has helped just numerous people all across North America. So in light of those really, really difficult things, Carrie Nelson and I were talking one day about Ukraine, and she knows some people who escaped and who have been having a really difficult time adjusting and figuring out how we find happiness even when there are really, really horrible things happening. Carrie is a friend of mine. She happens to have an MA in marriage and family therapy from Connecticut, a BS in sociology with an emphasis in psychology and family studies. I know some of you would like that. And has worked in clinical and private practice in Connecticut and here in Utah. She has gone with her husband to Rome and other far-flung places a fair amount, but she happens to be here right now. So I thought that maybe Carrie could talk to us about finding peace in grief.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Thank you. Thank you, Elaine. Yes, and a little bit of our discussion, the question that led our discussion began when I was having the family that came to live with us. They've been with us for 4 months, and they came at the very beginning of the conflict, which was unusual. And it was an unusual circumstance that we even heard about them. But they came to stay with us, and it was a beautiful family, mother, father, 5 children, and then it ended up their grandmother also was able to escape. But they came with us a week after leaving the country under very traumatic circumstances, as you might imagine. They were separated from their children and spent 3 days at the border trying to get their children to meet, to be able to join with them. And they were eventually reunited. And then from Poland, then they flew to the US and landed in Salt Lake because they had connections there. And we received a message from 2 separate friends, one's from the Netherlands and a friend from here, a nephew from here, saying, we just kept thinking of you. We kept thinking of your family, and we wondered if you might have a place for them. And we had also been thinking and hoping that there was something that we could do. And so it was a perfect match. And we said, of course. So, and then the reality of a family living with you hit me for the first few days before they came, and I was a little anxious, just hoping that we could be that safe haven for them, not knowing how they would be experiencing trauma and where, what they would be like. Anyway, so we became the closest of friends. They are just a lovely, beautiful family. And it has been for me quite a humbling experiencing watching their journey with trauma and with grief, and trying in whatever way I could to help them. And after a month or so of living here, there was a day of very heavy bombing in Ukraine. And my friend, the mother who was here, was devastated. And she had been a nurse in a maternity ward, and it was the day that they had bombed the maternity ward. So not only was she triggered for the safety of her children, it was the safety of every child. And that same day, we had a big conference for our faith, and the faith leader had presented the message: when you cannot find peace in the world, find peace within your own heart, which is a lovely idea, right? It's a lovely message. Her question to me, as we talked into the night, in her tears, was to say, Carrie, but how can I find peace? How can I find peace when the people and things, the place that I love is being destroyed? In the midst of all this suffering, how can I find peace? And so I just sat for a moment and I said, maybe not now. Maybe not right now. Maybe not completely. Maybe now is the time that we share sorrow and we find safety for you. And that, let's just do that. And so that was just the beginning of me understanding a little bit more about that process. I had been through my work dealing with a lot of clients, or I shouldn't say dealing, I had been working closely with a lot of people who had been dealing with extreme trauma and grief and loss. And so it wasn't something that was new to me, but it was certainly close. It was close to experience. And as a mother and as a human being, I felt very connected to what she was feeling as well. So I started to think carefully about that question, because I believe that good questions drive the greatest of explorations, the greatest of learning, and the greatest of discovery. It's all about the questions that we ask. So her question to me was a seminal one. And so I developed what I thought for myself were principles of resilience amidst the greatest of trial and trauma. And I love them because they all start with the same letter, so it makes it easy for me to remember. But the principles to me are calm, comfort, clarity, confidence, and creativity. And I'll explain just a minute of those. And Elaine, feel free to like wave me down if I'm talking too long, okay? Because I can definitely talk too long. The first principle that I thought of, and these principles are not discrete, one flows into the other, and they certainly are in no specific order that you need to follow. I wrote them in the order that made sense to me based on kind of our hierarchy of needs, right? And Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the first need that we have is to find safety, right? Is to be safe. And so to me, that was what calm was. Calm is of the body and the mind. And I think you and your business especially understand that holistic connection between mind and body, right? And like van der Kolk said in his The Body Keeps the Score, we know that we hold trauma in our body. We hold it in our mind and in our body, and we're made that way. We're actually made to respond, protect, and to remember, because that is how our body develops protective mechanisms against a recurring trauma or injury. The trick is we're not meant to stay in that state of high alert. That state of high protectiveness serves us well in the moment of trauma or of assault or of injury, but it is not meant to be a homeostatic state, right? Those high levels of cortisol and that high compression of musculature, those long-term create a difficulty in functioning in a normal way, in a normal pattern. So that becomes our task, how to calm our body and our mind, how to create a sense of safety. And so I understood from Oksana, that was our first task. That was her first task, is understanding that she was safe, right? And so you can do that through a myriad of ways. And I know we don't have time to talk about them all. And probably you know many of them, but it's a lot of mindfulness work, a lot of meditative work, a lot of body scans, things that I always find when the mind is busy and really anxious, it's sometimes easiest to start with the body, right? You can talk to your mind all day long, but it's very easy to get caught up in the loop. But if you can calm the body, that often then sends the message to the mind, we're safe now, right? We're okay now, we're at peace now. So you focus on the present, you focus on developing a calming rhythm about your life, about that moment that can reassure you. Okay, so then the next one is comfort, right? And comfort I love because it really is about self-care. Comfort is about responding compassionately to what you sense you might need. right? So it starts with what Kristen Neff would call mindful self-compassion. And this is one of my favorite things to do. It's the easiest thing to get people to understand and be attached to because it feels good, right? It feels like comfort. So we respond to it. So it's basically responding to yourself in the same way you would someone that you loved, a loving, kind friend, right? And as we start to identify the way we're speaking to ourselves, our inner dialogue, we start to understand how critical that might be, right? How negative that might be, how hurtful that might be. And we gentle that language to something kind, something encouraging. And it makes a tremendous difference. I remember the first time I went to a seminar and I did that, she had us put our hand on our heart or the place in our body that felt the most in need of comfort. And we just repeated to ourselves, I love you. I care about you. I mean, it was so powerful to me. I didn't generally talk to myself in that way, but I could easily talk to others in that way. So that's a way to teach yourself how to respond. So you listen and identify the way you feel, the emotions or the injuries that you might have without judgment. You acknowledge that that makes you part of humanity, not separate from it. One of the biggest dangers in being distressed is that we start to feel isolated. That emotion tends protectively to make us isolate, to draw in, right? So what we want to do is to resist that impulse and instead to open up. I am not a stranger to suffering. Neither is most of the world. Yeah. If you know someone who has had no suffering, I would love to know them. But to be honest, the people that I learn the most from, that I admire the most with the deepest humility are those that have suffered greatly. To me, there's a depth and a wisdom that they have that's irreplaceable. Yeah. So anyway, so that's the thing is you offer words of loving kindness and you develop healthy self-care routines, right? It sounds so basic, but when you've been in something traumatic or you're in the middle of something distressing, the easiest things go out the window, right? We don't sleep well, we don't eat well, we don't get out physically in a way that's relaxing and soothing to us, and we sometimes stop engaging in the things we normally love. So you structure a simple structure of those basic care things is very helpful. The next thing that I thought of is clarity. And I love this because to me, clarity is perspective, right? And in my work, I often think of the power of perspective. When you open up your perspective, you expand your possible responses, right? And emotions tend to do the opposite. The stronger the emotion, the more it polarizes your thought. So when something feels terrible, everything looks terrible, right? When you feel overwhelmingly sad, that seems to be all there is. And that's how emotionally, that's how our brain works. That parasympathetic part floods. It floods the other parts. So you want to actively open up your perspective. I'll tell people, even if they're in the height of depression, find a window. Find a window of light in your mind. Just look toward it, if that's all you can do. So it involves expressive writing and journaling your deepest thoughts. What are you experiencing? What are you feeling? And you gently start leading yourself towards what am I learning from this? How am I different now than I was before? What is deep about this? Who do I understand more than I did before? So, and then along with that journaling, you can do it either mentally or in a written form. You write things down that you're grateful for. Those are the points of light that you want to look toward, that you want to open up. In the midst of the deepest darkness, there is something that is light. And so you look towards those things and open them up. And I think you practice it. It absolutely is an attitude of gratitude that you can practice. And for me, the awareness of good in the spite of great trauma is probably one of your best antidotes. It's probably one of your best strengths. So then the next one is confidence. And I don't know if anyone's read the book Grit by Angela Duckworth, but basically in that book, she talks about how gritty people more diligently practice challenging situations. They're not afraid to throw themselves in to challenging situations. But how do you gain that confidence? You gain it by a practice that they talk about in psychology called exposure, right? You start with small things that are challenging, but things that you know put you in the direction that you want to go, that support your value system. So in other words, my value system is I would love to have greater core strength, right? Just like I want physical resiliency, mental resiliency, I want my physical resiliency. Right now, I don't really have that. So I'm starting with the smallest things that are possible to me, but that point me in that direction. And then I gain confidence. And that's the same thing that they talk about in grit. You practice and you know your purpose. And through that competence that's building, you breed confidence. So then when another wave hits you, you know how to surf to the top, right? You may not be strong enough to swim through it, but you know how to bounce to the top. So that's the practice. And you know, babies aren't born very resilient. They're incredibly vulnerable little people, but yet they have within them the capacity to adapt and to learn and to grow. That is why we can flourish and survive as human beings, not because we're invulnerable, but because we're adaptable and we can build skills and resilience. We can learn. And so that's what I love about it is you don't have to be either courageous or not. You can say, this is what I'd like to build. And so to do that, you start to do the simple, small steps that are challenging for you. And soon you start to identify yourself as that. Remember, we talked about the self-talk. You say to yourself, I can do hard things, right? I can do hard things. I am the kind of person who blah, 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 blah. And I remember for myself, there was a time in my life where it felt like everything was outside of my control. I was just trying to manage the outcome of things that were other people's choices. And it felt like a terrible position to be in. And they were not happy things, right, that were happening. And I remember coming to the conclusion that I had a choice, a very distinct choice. What kind of person was I going to be? And then something in my inner, that stubbornness that I had as a kid, just swelled up and I said, I will not be the kind of person that lets this be all there is of me, right? I'm not going to identify with this. This is something I can go through. This is something I have to experience. I don't choose it, but I am a person that keeps moving, that keeps walking. And so grit, people with grit, I began to identify themselves as such. And that's that level of confidence. So, okay, I know I might be running out of time. Elaine, tell me.
You're fine.
Okay. The next one that I love is creativity. That's the last one. And creativity is, our adaptive mind seeks to understand, right? It seeks to understand. It seeks to find answers, solutions. We're meant to avoid pain, right? If not, imagine how self-destructive that is. So the fact that you don't like pain, the fact that that grief is difficult for us to tolerate in ourselves and in others is a very natural phenomenon. There's nothing wrong with that. What we have to let ourselves know is that we can live with that and we have options how we do that, right? We don't have a choice often in what life gives us. Sometimes we do make choices, but often we don't. And in any case, we have options how to respond. That really is our power, always. And I think that's one of the things that I learned in therapy more than anything else is how little we understand our power, what we can do. So many things send us a message to the opposite. But it is absolutely true that there are things we can choose in every situation. Look at Viktor Frankl's book, right? Man's Search for Meaning. In the complete deprivation of almost everything we imagine to be necessary and certainly valuable, we still have some choice. So focus on what you can choose. Be creative. Let yourself know, and this is something I say to myself and I teach people to say is, this is not all there is, right? That goes back to our perspective again. This moment is not all there is. This tragedy is not all there is. This is not all there is of me. And it certainly is not all there is in the world. So I'm going to be open to learning. This creativity is, to me, it provides the meaning in our struggle, because that's our path to learning and wisdom. And in the end, we hope to get to the place where we can honor that trial, we can honor that trauma, we can honor that grief by what we have learned. And so to do that, I think we go back to asking ourselves the best possible questions, because remember, the question guides your journey, guides your path, your exploration, it guides your learning. So we ask ourselves questions like, how do I feel? First of all, what do I sense that I might need? What supports and guides me forward? What do I value most? How do I strengthen and hold on to those things I value? What do I think this situation might require of me? Or what opportunities, even better, does this situation bring to me that I didn't know before, or that I didn't have before? Notice how those questions make you feel, right? It's like, oh, I can go somewhere with this, right? Think about the difference between the questions like, why me? Why does this kind of thing happen to me? This isn't fair. Why did he do this to me? Why would Putin, if we're using a name for this context, do such horrible things? We don't know. Those are questions that are either unanswerable, or they stick us in a loop of being victims, right? We become a victim. We ruminate. We get stuck in the loop of thinking about that trauma and that grief, resentment. In the end, we continue the injury of our trauma and our grief. The question points us right back into it instead of through it or over it or around it, right? So listen to the questions that you ask yourself. And it's perfectly normal to have all of them. I mean, it's like when you're playing ball, someone throws a ball right at your head and you're like, why did you do that? You know, I mean, that's a very fair question. Part of that question that is helpful is, how do I avoid being in that situation again? Okay, if I know that person is not a reliable person to throw the ball, I am certainly going to pay attention when he has the ball, or I'm going to just not give the ball to him. Or, you know, I mean, we can learn from everything. And not only are we allowed to learn, that's how we're wired, right? That's how our brain is adaptive. So that's why I love things that open up that creativity, and that rather than close it and say there are absolutes in everything. There's only one way to think about this. There's only one way to do this. And I know in your business that you're all about opening up avenues of thought, right? Into how to find healing, how to find greater energy. And it's that creativity that guides you, right? And that confirms to you, this is a good path for me. And I think that is one of the polarizing impacts of negative and strong emotion, is it tends to encourage black and white thinking, right? It's a knee-jerk response to something difficult. Well, this is terrible, this is good. That's all there is.
Right.
But the truth is, that's never all there is, right? We never really know all there is. And that is probably the first lesson that I learned in trying to work with people to find their own sources of energy, is how humbling that is to be in the presence of another human being, right? How humbling it is to watch this family, to know I will never understand what it's like to be, in this lifetime, at least to this point, to be a refugee. But I know enough now to know that if I were in that position, I would probably be feeling just like them. And that is where I can join them in being a human being again, right? It's no longer I'm here and they're there, either from their perspective, right? Or from mine. We are both sharing this human experience. And to me, the sources of energy that we get from one another it's electric, right? It's electric. It's amazing. So anyway, so I know it, Elaine, is there any questions that you have? Do you want to stop me?
No, I had a list, and I think that you've really gone through most of them, which is fabulous. But I'm wondering if you could maybe add how the Savior ties in to all of this also.
Yes, thank you. That was the very end of my message. I said, you know, I don't know how many of you are Bible readers, but I've been reading a little bit about Job. And if you want an example, a very dramatic and really heart-wrenching example of someone trying to find resiliency in the face of tremendous catastrophic loss, right, and grief, you can study Job. And the thing that I learned from him is it wasn't that he didn't feel deeply. It wasn't that he didn't feel broken in every way. He said, I am completely broken to the dust. But what kept him living, not cursing God and dying, right, was his sense of his identity. He knew what his purpose was on the earth, and he knew that his connection to his God as his child was unbreakable. Mm. He also had perspective, right? He knew that wasn't the end of the story. He had clarity. He knew that his life would go on past this moment of great deprivation and difficulty. So I don't know what calm he experienced. His friends didn't really help him much, did they? They just made him feel bad about himself. But he had the confidence to know, no, it's not because I've sinned. And it's not because God hates me. I'm a human being, and these are things that happen in this world. And I will go back to the God that created me. And nothing, so his identity, his relationship with God, with his Savior, brought him peace when everything else was lost. And in my view, that is the most perfect. It's a perfect example of what that peace can bring. So anyway, does that answer that question?
Well, I thought you were going to spend more time on the questions, but you actually gave us a lot of answers.
Oh, sorry.
No, not at all. This is wonderful. You gave us places where we can go that we can think about. I know that there are some people who probably have some thoughts that they've been thinking. Sandra, you've got your hand up. Sandra.
Yes. I'd like to know how you deal with the language barrier, or is there one? Did they speak English?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. No, actually, the husband spoke a little English, and the oldest son and their daughter, but she wasn't often with us. She was at school. But this is the miraculous thing about it. Their wife spoke only one other language, and the children, and it was Italian. And my husband speaks fluent Italian, and we have been living in Italy. So we speak in Italian. We have this fluid language that just merges from one language to the other, where Elliot will speak Italian to her. I'll translate the English of what Elliot's saying to her husband. They'll talk about it in Ukrainian. They come back to us in either English or Italian. And so it must be really funny to listen to, but we communicate.
You're not bilingual, you're trilingual with a taste of let's merge it all.
Yes, we're trying, but it has been wonderful. That was a great blessing for sure.
Wow. I can't imagine the trauma. I have prayed frequently for them. And even today, when I was looking at a ministry program, and they have a refugee assistance. Mm-hmm. It's just, and I hear it was an absolutely gorgeous country that is just bombed.
Yeah. It really, really was. That was one of the things they loved to do that I just encouraged them to do. Show us pictures of your home. Show us pictures of your country. And in the early part, they just couldn't stop doing that. I mean, they just wanted to see, look how beautiful this subway is. Look how beautiful our home was. I mean, these were people of substance, of talent, and they were tremendously entrepreneurial, and they had built a beautiful life for themselves there. So they needed that to be honored. You know, we needed to acknowledge all of that. And then it got to the point towards the end where she couldn't look at pictures of her home. And so as people that share their grief, we just go where they go, right? We just honor what the feeling that's coming. But yeah, so anyway, sorry, that's probably more than you wanted to know.
Mhm. And I love the line, not just a line, it's a position. This is not all there is.
This is not all there is. I know. It's the most hopeful beginning, right? Yeah, I agree.
Mhm. And even now, as I interact with people who are going through whatever,
Mhm.
I can remind them this is not all there is. And if they are people of faith, I can remind them, do you know whatever you're looking at now probably will not last
Yes.
forever, not even necessarily your lifetime.
Yeah.
So just don't get stuck on the temporal.
Yeah. That is a great, great perspective. And that is another great reassurance and encouragement we can give ourselves. Most hard things are time limited in nature, right? Nothing, especially if you have an eternal view, a faith-based view that goes beyond this world. Absolutely, this is not the end. We have someone in our congregation who has said something. This is not the end yet, and if it looks like the end, just hang on. Just keep going. Right?
That's
So
right.
you're right. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. I have a girlfriend who speaks frequently messages of faith, and she said, if what you see is not what God promised you, then you're not at the end yet.
Yeah, I love that.
That's lovely.
I love that. And see that, and that is the beauty of not letting yourself fall in the trap of that question, whose fault is this?
Right.
Because that leaves you only three options, right? That question only has three paths. It's either me, it's my fault, I'm horrible, I've done something horribly wrong, or it's God. God's doesn't exist, or how could he exist, or how could he be responsible for this horrible thing? Or someone else is responsible and in control of my destiny, right? I am the victim of someone else. But neither of those three paths lead us through trial in the way that brings us healing, right? That brings us growth, that brings us wisdom. They're short circuits, or they're, what's the word? False paths. Dead ends. There's the word. That's the word I was thinking of. But yeah, they're dead ends. So anyway, thank you. I like that.
Wow. Anybody else? Lorraine? Going once? Going twice?
Yeah, I just made a comment. It was a wonderful presentation, and I certainly agree with that line of thinking, and it really sustains me when I'm looking at everything that's coming around me, and that I can turn myself and ground myself to a place where there's a lot of possibilities. And and creativity, and I love the creativity part of it, because that is so much fun to be creative.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I think all of those things play into what we really seek for. That's why I love them. I think that's how our brain is wired to seek, to be creative and find solutions and to grow and adapt and learn. So really, we're just guiding ourselves in a way that's most helpful. We're not engineering anything false, right? We're just honoring and respecting and allowing what we're meant to do, I think.
Wonderful.
Which speaks to why you have to watch who you're associating with and who your support system really is, because it can lead you down to a precipice that wasn't even going to be there, except you let it come in because of who you listened to. So I'm just glad that family has you.
Oh, well, they've been a bigger blessing to us, I'm sure, than we could ever be to them. But it's humbling to be able to help, right? To provide something of service. But you're right. I love that idea. And that went along with that comfort. Find and build trusted, loving, healthy relationships. Not just because it feels great in the moment, but because we need each other, right? We're meant to have people around us. We're not meant to live solitary lives.
Right. What was the name of the presentation? Because I can give it so many names.
I don't know, Elaine, what would you call the presentation? We had the beginning, we had the question that led it. How do we find peace? And I would say peace, purpose, a path. I wouldn't just say peace, because I want us to be moving too, right? A peace, a path, a purpose in the midst of a great adversity or a great tragedy, trauma. I also I call it principles of resilience. But you can call it whatever you want. I don't mind. Hopefully you just called it worthwhile. That's the main thing.
Well, that's what I'm calling it. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
You are not only a really sensitive person, but you have all of that background that you've been able to put it all together in really wonderful ways. And thank you for creating this for us. I can
You're welcome.
that you went the extra mile. It's not just a conversation. You really crafted that. That's another C. You crafted it for us.
Oh, thank you.
That is so perfect. It's crafted because you took elements from different academic, humane life events, and you had to pull it together. And that's why when people just go to school to get a degree, I said, that won't work.
Yeah.
You got to pull all this stuff together and make it useful.
Exactly. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, this is something that we all face individually and in our families and in our community.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for giving us some tools and giving us perspective and, and a way to look out past.
Thank you, really.
And this will be very, very fun to have this. Hi, Bill. This will be very fun to have this on YouTube and be able to make that available for any of us to relook at and also to make available for, for loved ones and other people that that are seeking a little bit more peace and seeking more self-reliance in being able to move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Carrie.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll see you later and have a great weekend. And let's all, first of all, go find someone that we can smile at. That will raise their energy and it'll raise yours too.
That's right.
Goodbye. Bye, everyone. Thank
So
you.
comforting. Thank you.